No, I'm Dr. Peter Carter. I'm making a video, a talking head video of myself. It's a kind of follow-up or company video to the recent long one I did on the topic of climate change and war. So I'm going to share some of my own beliefs, some of my thoughts on the situation today regarding those two horrors. Now, yesterday, on the 23rd of January 2024, the annual Doomsday Clock was published by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. The Doomsday Clock is stuck at just 90 seconds to midnight. That is the closest to midnight doomsday since the project was started in 1945 by Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer. So, of course, the great fear was to prevent a world nuclear war, and that fear very much proved to be the case, as after World War II, the United States and the USSR, the then Soviet Union, embarked on a nuclear arms race. I got involved with this back in the 80s because there was a real fear that even if just by accident these nuclear weapons would be set off and the world would be literally destroyed. And that became an even greater concern when the policy of the United States and the USSR was supposedly peace and security through a policy of mutually assured destruction. And yeah, it was a real policy, and it was called MAD. And as I got more and more involved in that situation, it became clearer and clearer that it was exactly that. It was MAD. It was a global insanity. And so today, the world is clearly in a most insane and most evil situation, both from the point of view of war and weapons of mass destruction, and from the point of view of global heating and global climate disruption, planetary destruction. So the back to the Doomsday Clock. So the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, one of their headlines was, "Ominous trends continue to point the world towards global catastrophe." And that is exactly the state we are in. So the background to the report today, first, war and nuclear weapons. They point out that the war in Ukraine and the widespread and growing reliance and mentioning and threatening of nuclear weapons increases the risk of nuclear escalation. China, Russia, and the United States are all spending huge sums to expand and modernize their nuclear arsenal, adding to the ever-present danger of a nuclear war, even if by a mistake and miscalculation. Now, I want to go back to the decades ago to the nuclear arms race. At the time, at the height, there were 60,000 nuclear warheads, mainly owned by the United States and the USSR. The world was on a hair trigger situation with regards to these nuclear weapons and nuclear war, because they were set up so that if one side detected a warhead, IBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, launched, it would be automatic that the other side would launch its IBMs, and therefore the world would be literally destroyed. Fortunately, there was a nuclear weapons treaty. It was a very happy event, actually, in the dark times, and it was signed by President Reagan and Gorbachev. Now, the treaty was really quite successful. The weapons, the nuclear warheads, were progressively destroyed, and they were destroyed by a very interesting arrangement between the USSR and the United States. And so the amount of nuclear weapons has pretty well been halved. It's about 15,000 now. Now, 15,000 nuclear warheads is more than enough still to devastate the world. So, as the Doomsday Clock here points out, We are still in a highly threatening situation. So the Doomsday report says that as though on the Titanic, leaders are steering the world toward catastrophe, more nuclear bombs, vast carbon emissions, and the Bulletin says that America and Russia can pull us back. America and Russia and China, it's referring to there. And despite deep antagonism, which unfortunately continues and has increased over recent years, these great powers must cooperate for the security of the world and security of the future, or we are doomed. I completely agree with the conclusion of the bulletin. And so I want to turn now to the situation that we're in regards war. I discovered, and I pointed out in my war and climate change video, that in actual fact, the world is at a worse situation regards war and conflict than it's ever been since the end of the Second World War. And over the past 10 and even couple of years, this state of war and conflict has escalated greatly. We are in a very, very awful situation. Yeah, the world is in a terrible situation, but not only because of these wars and the weapons. It's well known, really, with the history of war that, of course, they all end eventually in a peace agreement. But the effects of war do not end there. The effects of war go on for many, many, many decades because of the deaths and the injuries and the disability, but also most particular to the damage which is done to the emotions, the nervous system, the psychology of individuals. And of course, that applies particularly to children. So war does not end with making peace in the sense of ending the hostilities. It goes on and on and on, doing more and more damage within a country, within the civilian population. Perhaps the biggest of many reasons why we must have disarmament. The goal has to be disarmament, and why we must all work and work reasonably hard on a continuing basis in the very good work of peacemaking, of urging, lobbying, calling for, and helping towards the establishment of disarmament and peace. So I want to repeat that war is a belief, and it is an insanity, and it's an insanity within our cultures and within our societies. And we have to respond to it. We have to neutralize it, and we have to switch from a war-based culture, war-based economy, to a peace-based one. And that brings me to the realization that we had in the peace movement decades ago, that what we call the economy is actually a constant war economy. It's an economy of war. And that was totally established on a deep and worldwide scale as a result and continuing of the Second World War. I've talked to many veterans who have told me, yeah, we won the war, but we failed to win the peace. And so the figures, insane figures that I quoted in the other video, that the world military expenditures are now over $2 trillion a year. I think it's $2.2 trillion. That is completely insane. And it is an evil which results in great evils. And yes, practically half of this military expenditure is from the United States. But another thing that I learned is that practically all countries, I mean the smallest and poorest of countries, have their war machine, have their militaries, have their weapons, and purchase their weapons And of course, there is this obscene armaments trade. The rate at which weapons are being deployed and shells are being sent off in the Ukraine-Russian conflict is absolutely unbelievable. Tens of thousands of these large shells are being fired from from the military of both sides. And so, of course, my main concern over recent years has been climate disruption, global heating and climate disruption, ocean acidification. And this is a totally global degradation. This is affecting the entire planet, the entire biosphere. It's established that climate change increases conflict, increases the likelihood of war, and that war is a large source of greenhouse gas emissions. And in the other video, I tried to explain the theme that the fossil fuel industry is behind both. Obviously, the fossil fuel industry is the main source of carbon dioxide greenhouse gas pollution, the main cause of heating, ocean heating, surface heating, and also the sole cause of ocean acidification. All of these degradations, all of these insults to the biosphere are at record high and they're increasing at record rates. That is definitely crazy. There are some great young people who have come to realize what their future is looking like, and they are protesting and working towards an end to the fossil fuel industry and a complete replacement by the clean renewable energy sources. And of course, we've known for decades, and actually the IPCC confirmed it in a special report on renewable energy, that we have way more than enough renewable energy to replace all fossil fuel energy. And that is an imperative for survival. There's no question about that. And as I've mentioned, the IPCC has called for the immediate and rapid decline of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that is a survival imperative for humanity, but also for most life on Earth. And obviously, the fossil fuel industry is a driver and a provider of weapons of war, which have been getting worse and worse and worse, more and more and more and more devastating since the end of the Second World War. And so disarmament is also now imperative for survival. A demilitarization, a conversion of military resources to peaceful resources, and now, of course, resources in order to save what we can of our planet. Right now, our largest and greatest resources are being dedicated to war when we desperately need all of those resources to be dedicated to the mitigation and also to the adaptation of climate disruption. And my final point for the children, because as Naomi Klein so wisely said, the children must always come first in our thoughts about war, but also in our thoughts about climate change. Our civilization, our society, our economy is leaving a world for today's children. Today's children, all the world, are leaving a world which, at the minimum, is going to be very harsh and hard to live in. And the IPCC has warned us with a sort of message that we are looking at climate change isn't treated as the emergency, which, thank goodness, is now realized, and very good work done on that from many climate change organizations. So our children must not inherit a planet which is in rapid decline from global climate disruption. They must not inherit such a planet. Our children are a sacred trust, just as what we call the environment is a sacred trust. The coral reefs, they are sacred trusts. The great forests, they are sacred trusts. And the ocean, of course, is a sacred trust. There's nothing unusual about recognizing that these is a sacred trust. In my lifetime, I'm aware that all of the organized religions worldwide, they have all declared that Earth is sacred. Now, the indigenous people in my lifetime have come to understand that they believe because they know that Earth is sacred, and they regard and treat and know that Earth is Mother Earth, as I was taught as a child in England, Mother Nature. And we must not leave our children a hostile world, increasing war breaking out, and increasing death and devastation. That's got to be first and foremost in our aims and our goals in our life, all of us. We must leave a legacy of a planet and a climate which is fit for our children, and our children everywhere, all countries. So, thank you for listening.